many of you really fully understand what's going on in Ukraine? How many of you really, truly know what's truly going on in Ukraine? How many of you know this man, Sergei Lyshenko? All these people are involved, one way or another, with Mr. Biden. Now, everybody's looking at the word Burisma. It's what I call misdirection. Let's go back to the time when we talked about Uranium 1. That was misdirection. The real scandal is Skolkovo. Look that up. Viktor Vekselberg, Bill Clinton meeting Moscow. Very interesting. Again, I'm now going to show you why this in itself is misdirection. Here is the perfect phone call. Now, there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. Is because I want you to look at it. I want you to realize what went on here. I want you to appreciate the factor of this. So I'm going to sort of bring it up, he says, to the point where it's here. No, not that one. This bit here. I would like you to do us a favour though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on. The whole situation, I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like you to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, the whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance, but they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it, if that's possible. It's that paragraph there that panicked the Democrats. Notice not one word in that paragraph is Burisma. Later on, he talks about here about Biden's son, but no mention about Burisma. Why? The whole thing is about baiting these people and bringing them in, and about the ambassador. Now, the ambassador had nothing to do with Burisma, but there is something else that they did. And I'm going to show you. But first of all, we're going to listen to a phone call. And then I'm going to discuss that bit further.
Let me ask you one thing before I forget. Privat Bank. I understand the governor of the bank is tentative about setting a date certain for the transition to take place, and I'm being told secondhand that, I don't know this is her position for sure, that she is unsure of a date until she gets an agreement from you. Here's what I've told them. I've told them to get back to her and set a date, and I would talk to you about the date, because this is getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in a position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the detail. So anything you can do to push the Privat Bank to closure so that the IMF loan comes forward, I would respectfully suggest is critically important to your economic as well as physical security. I know it's difficult. I know Kolomoisky is a pain in the ass and a problem for everybody, but it really is critical that you guys figure this one out. And you've been good. You've publicly spoken out as I've asked you to do. You've done that. I just want you to give what's she called, the commissioner, the governor, the governor of the bank, give her some spine. Let her know that you're going to be standing there when she sets a date and moves forward.
This is very important what I hear from you, and I think that on the 22nd of November, on Tuesday, I will have a final report from Ernst & Young audit, and we agreed that me, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Governor, I invite Arseny and our security officers should meet and make a decision about the date. The only reason I have, after 22nd, when I have an audit report, we have a voting of the budget in the parliament, where Kolomoisky has a significant number of members of parliament, and the Prime Minister asked me to vote budget first and then launching the process. This is the confidential information, but
I will keep that with me. I will keep that with me.
The biggest person pushing for this bank to be privatised was Joe Biden. You heard it yourself. But here we have the BBC News, and it talks about Ukraine's biggest commercial bank, Privat Bank, has been nationalised in a move aimed at protecting 20 million customers and preserving financial stability in the country. We could always rely on the BBC because the BBC is in bed with a lot of this. Why did Ukraine nationalise its largest private bank in December of 2016? So literally, from that phone call in November, and then in December, boom, it's nationalised. Why? So let's read a bit of this. In December 2016, the National Bank of Ukraine, NBU, nationalised Ukraine's largest private bank for what we now know was an incorrect understanding of the facts. It remains unclear who benefited from this expropriation. But it wasn't just a misunderstanding. The nationalisation of Privat Bank very likely was a result of a still unexplained refusal by the NBU to accept the financial reality of the situation. This extraordinary government takeover has made the banking and economic situation in Ukraine much worse rather than better, in an almost classic case of government overreach. It's really interesting. I'll link these below. You can read them for yourself. Then, in 2019, in September, police raid offices and seized documents of Ukraine's Privat Bank. September 11, Reuters. Ukraine's largest lender, Privat Bank, said police had raided its headquarters on Wednesday after a court allowed them to do so as part of a criminal investigation into whether some of its officials had overstepped their authority. Privat Bank's fortunes are closely watched by investors as a bellwether for business climate under Ukraine's new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who has business ties to the bank's former owner, Ihor Kolomoisky. We're going to get into him a bit later. The bank was nationalised in late 2016, triggering a protracted battle between Kolomoisky and the authorities. The International Monetary Fund could freeze new aid to Ukraine if the nationalisation were to be reversed. It's very interesting, isn't it? This bank is playing a rather large factor in all of this. So, let's look at the governor, shall we? Her name was Valerie Gontarariva. I'm probably butchering it. She's an interesting character, and she was the governor of the National Bank of Ukraine from 2014 to 2017. But what happened to her is even more an interesting saga. It's revenge. Now we can talk about The Guardian, another left-wing paper, so these people will be on board with the disinformation. It's revenge. Ukraine's ex-central banker blames oligarchs for the attacks. Apparently, I'll read this bit to you. It is possible that when a car drove into Valerie Kontareva, at a pedestrian crossing in Knightsbridge, central London, in late August. It was merely an accident. But soon after, while Kontravieva was recovered in hospital, her son's car was set on fire back home in Kiev. A few days after that, her family home in the Ukraine capital was also burned down. For Kontravieva, there is no doubt that the attacks were a part of a disturbing pattern. It's revenge, she said, appearing for an interview in a wheelchair in the lobby of a luxury central London apartment block where she now lives. Kontravieva made a number of powerful enemies during her reform-minded stint at the head of Ukraine's central bank. However, she blames the bank on one person, Ihor Kolomoisky. Get into this games, but this is even more interesting. Police suspects ex-head of National Bank Kontravieva ordering arson on her own house. These people will do anything to smear people, and they don't care what they do. Is Kolomoisky a good guy? No, he's not. But this shows you something very disturbing going on here. Now, what's it all about? Did Biden say the Ukraine firm responsible for the $1.8 billion in missing aid his son is on the board with? In the last days of the Obama administration, Vice President Joe Biden took a swan-song trip to Ukraine, a notoriously corrupt country where he had the administration's point person. On the eve of this trip, the country announced it would end criminal investigation into a company connected to the loss of $1.8 billion in aid funding, a company whose board of directors included Biden's son Hunter. The Biden family is dealing with this Ukrainian company involved getting one of the country's most notorious mob bankers, Ihor Kolomoisky, off the US government visa ban list. Under Biden's leadership, $3 billion in aid went to Ukraine, and his son's company was implicated in the disappearance of $1.8 billion of that money. So we have $1.8 billion in missing aid. $1.8 billion IMF Ukraine bailout money deposited in Ukraine oligarch Kolomoisky's Cyprus offshore bank account. This is according to a German newspaper. What is Biden running scared about? What is the DNC panicked about Ukraine so much? Ukraine Governor Kolomoisky sacked after oil firm row. This is in 2015. Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko has sacked Ihor Kolomoisky, the billionaire governor of the key industrial region, and I cannot pronounce the word. It comes after the armed men suspected of links to Mr. Kolomoisky briefly occupied the offices of a state-owned oil firm in the capital Kiev. Mr. Kolomoisky was reported unhappy after Parliament passed legislation aimed at weakening his influence. Correspondents said the dispute could affect the conflict in the east. It triggered fears of a major showdown between the tycoon and the state. Why is Mr. Kolomoisky so important? Because he was put in charge as a governor of a region where he built an army on to fight the Russians. Ihor Kolomoisky, a Ukrainian oligarch, rises in the east. This is an interesting article. It will tell you more about the guy. Don't forget, this guy was banned from going to the US, and it was Biden that allowed him to go to the US. This guy owned the bank, Privat Bank. Your woman, Valerie Kontravieva, who was the governor who privatized the bank, on the word of Kolomoisky. Now it gets a little bit more interesting. US Embassy pressed Ukraine to drop probe into George Soros Group during the 2016 election. Anti-Corruption Action Center, or otherwise known as ANTAC. And it was about 4.4 million in US funds to fight corruption inside the former Soviet Republic being properly diverted. So what was Viktor Shokin looking at? Wasn't so much Burisma, he was looking at ANTAC. Washington told Ukraine to end probe into George Soros-funded group during 2016 US election report. An NGO co-funded by George Soros was spared prosecution in 2016 after the US urged Ukraine to drop a corruption probe targeting the group. The Hill reported, pointing out potential shenanigans during the US presidential elections. Why? That is the question. Now, Antac is also connected to something else. It's called the Black Ledger. Remember that one that took down Paul Manafort and created a lot to do with the Russian collusion? But also, it's about US aid. I think Shokin stumbled across something that he wasn't supposed to find, and that's what cost him his job, because I'm going to do it all in the next video. I'm going to go into how Shokin was set up, the evidence to show that Shokin is innocent, and the fact that Biden is hiding something, and it's all to do with this large amount of US aid money. Well, let's look at Antac. This is Antac's webpage. But where do you send their money to? Oh, that's right, Privat Bank. What if Shokin, in his investigation, would go to Privat Bank and then find this whole set of money laundering going on, using IMF money and US aid money for something else? The evidence is quite clear here. You see, this is, like I said, again, of what we call misdirection. Everybody's focusing on Burisma. The real story is Privat Bank. Just like when everybody was focusing on Uranium One, the real story was Skolkovo, and Skolkovo's connection to the Clintons and a guy called Viktor Vekselberg. Now remember, I talked about that guy Sergei Lyshenko, who was the guy working with Chalupa, who was the guy working with Antac, who was the reporter that reported out on the Black Ledger. May 16th, 2019, the Ukraine prosecutor Sergei Lyshenko buys a luxury condo shortly after leaking Manafort docs. He is now being investigated as a foreign bribe. There is a lot more to what's going on in the story in Ukraine. I'll put all these links below. But more importantly, what I'm going to talk about now is the fact I want to talk about Viktor Shokin. Viktor Shokin was an innocent man. Viktor Shokin was set up. He was smeared. And he was smeared by the same people that do it all the time to everybody. So where we got these activist reporters pretending to be reporters, they're not. What they are pushing the DNC misinformation so you do not look at what was going on in Ukraine. Go back to that phone call and re-listen to it again now that you've heard and see all this evidence coming out. Is the fact of the matter is Privat Bank was nationalized under the order of Joe Biden. Viktor Shokin was fired from his job under the order of Joe Biden. Why is the vice president of one country telling the president of another country what they can and what they cannot do in their country? That's the first question. What are they hiding? More to come. More to come.